welcome to the Simply Trade podcast, news roundup edition, obviously. I'm your host, Anik, and I will be hosting the session with, I have someone really exciting in the studio. She's a trade expert. She's I would say CEO now of Magnolia Global Trade Solutions, also a trade expert, which led you to, being your own boss at this point. I'm so happy to have you, Bonnie Kersch. Sorry, your last name is so German, by the way.
It is. I stole it from my wife, though. I can't claim it, but.
Oh, really? Is she German?
Yeah, I mean, by like
just
DNA, like back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, that's so cool. Well, you have a cool last name. I also want to take note, if you are watching the video today, you'll see my new little sign. It says Simply Trade.
It's really cute.
Yeah, it is, right? It lights up. We've had it for a while, and I saw it and I'm like, Lalo, why is this not up? Why are we not having it? And he's like, yeah, true. We have to put it up. And so it's up now. So if you're watching the video, if you're not, it's fine. Just forget I said anything. But like every week nowadays in 2025, we have an episode with loads of information, really information overload that we might not even get to it all, and it might also change. So if you're hearing that, you will hear this on a Monday, depending on when you're listening. We're recording on Friday the week before, which, it's the weekend in between. There shouldn't be much happening, but at the moment, we can't really guarantee anything, because if you're up to speed, you know that things are changing within, I have to say hours, if not minutes at this point.
Yeah.
It's wild. And Bonnie, I feel like you know this firsthand. You really have to keep up with the news, especially as a trade expert and as a consultant, helping people, navigate through these times. And I kind of want to ask about a brief overview of what are the major tariff changes or announcements currently made by President Trump, and what are businesses kind of worried about regarding to tariffs right now?
Oh my gosh, what a loaded question, Anik.
I'm sorry.
Many.
I just said tariffs.
Yes.
That's all. Just tariffs.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing, right? So, President Trump took office on January 20th, right? And then immediately there was a flight of deported people that flight was supposed to land in Colombia, but the president didn't agree. The president of Colombia didn't agree with the way that these people were being treated, which is fair. He saw them in shackles being walked down, to board the plane, and he disagreed with that and didn't allow the flight to land. And so the very first thing that happened 6 days into office on a weekend, to your point, was that President Trump was like, no, you're not going to let this plane land. Okay, we're going to put 25% tariffs on Colombia.
Yeah.
And then they went back and forth, and ultimately the Colombian president said, okay, we'll let the plane land, but it needs to be on a commercial flight, not a military flight. And I don't want these people in shackles. Like, they're humans. They deserve to be treated with respect. And so they came to that agreement, and there were no longer tariffs. But you've got trade people who are like, oh my gosh, we import from Colombia, so this is scary. And then he threatened to make it 50% tariffs within a week if they didn't come to a deal. So all of this happened within less than 24 hours, that, there were these tariffs, and then the tariffs were going to be 25%, then 50%. And then never mind, we came to a deal, no more tariffs. So that's how we started out the first week in President Trump's presidency.
Yeah. And what a week.
What a week. What a weekend. I mean, it was just, I'm like at my bowling league, checking this stuff. Like, what is happening? It was just nuts. And then, he said, okay, we're going to put a 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which is a little crazy because there's, the USMCA free trade agreement in place. So that kind of goes against that. So that's a little bit wild. Then some agreements were made with Canada and Mexico where they agreed to put more troops on the border in their respective countries rather. And so President Trump said, okay, we're going to delay those. So those are delayed for now until March 4th. So we'll see what happens, within the next week or two.
But that's still crazy for businesses, because
Crazy.
kind of do have to prepare. They have to invest money to kind of prepare for this, to understand what, what more they have to take on besides the tariffs. Because I mean, it is tariffs, but like, I feel like you need people who know at that point what you have to do. Do you have, like, are you really paying the tariffs? Like,
Yeah,
just understanding. So you're putting in money and you're investing in
absolutely.
kind of your business to make sure that you're complying. But like, you don't even have to comply right now because there's nothing to comply to. So,
Not
I mean,
yet.
until there is, but
Right.
it's just like such a,
It's a
I mean,
moving
uncertain
target, right?
time.
And then,
Yeah.
to your point, like, you have to consider how are you going to absorb some of these costs, right? Because there are very few businesses in the world who can say, oh, my costs are going to go up 25%. Oh, that's fine. That's no big deal, right? There's
Yeah.
very
The
few.
consumer will pay. The consumer
Absolutely.
will pay.
And so you have to decide, like, do I pass all of that cost to the consumer? Do I lay off some people so that I don't have to pass all of the costs to the consumer and I can like save money in my budget other ways? What do you do with this added cost? And then you might, to your point, need to hire more people who know global trade compliance so that you can think about cost saving strategies, right? So like, would a bonded warehouse make sense? Would a free trade zone make sense? What about, are there more free trade agreements I could possibly be using? What about duty drawback? Is that a strategy that my company has never used that maybe we need to look into now that we're going to have added costs, right? So yeah, these tariffs are just really affecting all companies at this point.
Well, it's a trend right now. I feel like laying off people is not something we're afraid of right now
Yeah.
as a country, apparently. We see that left and right. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's right now affecting the trade industry. It seems like it's um, more based around government agencies and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if those tariffs come, there will be more people laying off. And I don't really know how that affects the statistics of unemployment.
That's a
Because I
really good
think
question.
unemployment is such a big thing we fight about during elections. It's like you had more unemployed people during this time, this president, and then you are not. So I'm wondering how that affects statistics. I mean, whatever a president does, it affects certain outcomes. So I'm wondering where those statistics will go. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Honestly, everything is interesting right now.
Everything right now. So, I don't know about the unemployment, statistics specifically and how they're
That'll
related
be
to trade.
a
But
future
thinking
thing.
about this before, so what President Trump is doing right now is very similar to what happened right before the Great Depression with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. If anyone wants
Mm-hmm.
to Google that and look into that. So basically, a bunch of tariffs were raised significantly during the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in like 1930, right before in the height of the Great Depression, and severely worsened the Great Depression. So, while I can't talk about necessarily the statistics between raising tariffs and people being laid off, we do know that we've seen this before, right? And we saw the impact that this had on the financial instability of our country in the past.
Yeah,
So it's
and
worrisome.
I brought this up before here in Germany, but I went to Berlin one time, and I went to the Berlin Wall, and very significant for history and stuff.
Yeah.
And it says, "Don't let history repeat itself."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you should know history before you move on to whatever you're going to do in the future, right? And it was like so. I mean, it just applies to so much.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It really does. That's why
Especially right
history
now.
class is so important, right? To learn from the past so you don't repeat your mistakes.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
people might say we live in a different world. It might work now, but I mean, making money has always been the same. So,
Yeah.
anyways, I wanted to address so where am I? Oh yeah. Wait, where am I? Here we go. Okay. An executive order targeting synthetic opioids from China has caused really logistical issues at ports, right? I mean, you said JFK. I think that you stated that. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Like, is it still going on? Is that still something that is an issue?
Yeah, so basically what happened is President Trump is raising a lot of these tariffs in the name of national security. He's using IEPA in order to, that's the framework under which he's enacting these tariffs. And he did issue an executive order on synthetic opioids, like you said, which targets the supply chain coming from China on fentanyl and fentanyl precursors mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that, he said that nothing that is of Chinese origin will be allowed to go through using de minimis. So that's
Oh,
a really big deal. That backed up when he said that and put it into effect immediately on February 1st. It caused a 1 million package backlog at JFK Airport of de minimis packages coming from China. And so he had to say, okay, wait, let's raise this. Let's reinstate and allow Chinese origin goods to come through de minimis again until the Secretary of Commerce can figure out a mechanism for how to collect duties on these packages. So right now, on February 5th, it was reinstated. So right now you
yeah.
can still enter packages of Chinese origin under de minimis, but it looks like it will go away soon. So
Uh,
this is going to
yeah.
cause a lot of issues.
So do you think it'll cause issues for Americans or
Yes.
for China?
100% it will cause issues for Americans. So I don't know, Anik, have you ever shopped on like Temu or Shein?
Well, I was gonna bring it up because
Yeah.
to be fair, I think those companies are taking advantage of their low prices
Mhm.
and shipping it through the de minimis. And I don't know if they're doing it correctly. I don't know what
Yeah.
the case is, but I mean, I don't know if is that benefiting the United States that they're doing that.
Yeah. So, well,
Okay.
I guess, is it benefiting the United States or is it benefiting the United States consumer? I think those are two different questions, right?
Consumer. Okay, well,
So,
okay, that's funny that you said that because that's a good point. We never really
mhm.
addressed the consumer, and the consumer was at first place when we talked about presidents and whatnot. And the consumer right now is totally out of play. Like they're
Yeah,
not in any conversation currently, right?
yeah, this is going to affect. So, if we're just talking about not allowing Chinese origin goods to come through on de minimis, that's going to affect you as a consumer because, a lot of these companies, not just Shein, Temu, lots and lots of countries take advantage of de minimis every day. And it's a perfectly legal framework in which they can operate. There's nothing wrong with them taking advantage of de minimis.
Okay.
Everyone is eligible for that, right? As long as you're an importer importing up to $800 per day, you can do that duty free. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly eligible program anyone can take advantage of. But when you have companies, and I hate to pick on anyone, but let's pick on Temu for a minute. So you've got
Yeah.
let's call it basically a dollar store, an online dollar store. Everything
Yeah.
is very low price. I've never shopped there, but I understand everything's like super cheap, and
Yeah.
I don't know if the quality's good. I'm not sure. But you
Eh.
place an order you place an order on there, and my understanding is it comes directly from China to your door, and it's able to come in duty free under this de minimis exemption, where unless you're ordering $800 worth of goods, more than $800 on Temu, which gosh, do they even sell anything that expensive? I don't know how much you'd have to order to get to $800, but
Yeah, a lot.
unless you're ordering that much, everything's going to come in duty free. Well, now, Onik, if you order, let's say, $100 worth of, I don't know, did they sell clothing? Let's say clothing on Temu.
That's Shein, but it's the same. It's the
Okay.
same. I feel like it's all the same. It's all the same,
Okay,
I feel
so
like.
let's say you order $100 worth of widgets, whatever,
Yeah.
on Temu. Now there's going to be duty tacked onto that. And now, because it's of Chinese origin, you're going to have not only your base duty rate, whatever that is, 6%, 10%, plus the extra 25% Section 301 tariffs that President Trump enacted in his last presidency, plus the extra 10% that he's
Percent.
enacted in this presidency.
Oh my
So now
God.
you might have, if your base duty rate is 10%, then you have the 25%, that's 35. Then you have the extra 10, that's 45. You're going to pay 45% more for these goods than you were paying in the past.
Yeah.
If they pass all of that, on to consumers, which I would have to assume they're going to pass at least a majority of it. So
Well, I
yeah, it's going
also,
to affect the
yeah.
American consumer for sure. It has to.
Yeah. And and not even, I mean, we're talking about one thing, but what is China going to do? If, they're making so much money currently, what are they going to do when they know, well, they're going to have to
They're
put,
going to retaliate.
Put it on to consumers. Consumers are not going to buy anymore at least that much. Who knows what's going to happen? And then China obviously has to kind of do something about it. Like they're going to have to reciprocal. I mean, I really don't know where they could enact more tariffs.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to do. And so that's what they did with the Section 301 tariffs that we saw roll out in, I believe it was 2018, where that's why you have sort of 5 lists of tariffs that were enacted, because President Trump said, okay, on this list, we're going to put tariffs on these items, right? That's list 1. And then China said, okay, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to put tariffs on these items. And then we said, well, if you're doing that, it became very much a tit for tat, right? Like they put more tariffs. Then we said, okay, well, we're going to expand that. And here's a second list of items we're going to put tariffs on. And it kept going back and forth until we got to list like 4B. So it just, it's going to be the exact same thing. China, all of these countries. I mean, as soon as President Trump said that he was going to put the 25% tariff on Canada, they immediately that same day responded, well, we're going to do it too. We're going to put 25% on US goods. I mean, it's just, that's a trade war. That's what that is.
Yeah. So. And going to trade war, I mean, that is something I think the EU also kind of has addressed, and they're trying to negotiate, right? I mean, Claudia Sheinbaum, she's negotiated, and it seems like they're on a little bit right now on a, I don't want to say good note, but they're even, like, I mean,
working
also Trump has to come back. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do now? Like, they're all coming back. And I don't know if that's what he expected or didn't expect. And it's like, what do we really want out of this? Like, if we say 25% tariffs, the other country will retaliate. So where is this going? What is the initial want out of this?
Yeah, I think it's it depends on the tariff, right? And the country, I think in some cases, President Trump this week, it was on the 13th. So what was that, last week?
Reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah, he announced those reciprocal tariffs where he was saying, okay, well, and he gave a couple of examples in his memo released by the White House. He said, Brazil charges 18% on US ethanol. So when we send ethanol to Brazil, they charge an 18% duty. But when Brazil sends us ethanol, we only pay 2.5%. We only charge them 2.5%. Yeah,
and that's a valid point.
So he's saying, we want to level the playing field, right? And so if you're going to charge us 18%, we're going to charge you 18%.
Yeah.
So I think there's, some of these tariffs have been raised in the name of national security to help with the opioid epidemic. I don't know how I feel about that, whether that's legitimate or just a ruse to blame it on opioids, to say that this is what I want to do. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe he is legitimately trying to help. I kind of struggle with seeing how raising tariffs helps with the opioid epidemic, but and then in some cases, he's saying that he wants to level the playing field for U.S. manufacturers and so on. But again, when you raise U.S. tariffs, it's the manufacturers in the U.S. who are paying them. So I know that he said a lot of times, like, we're going to raise tariffs on Brazil or something, like that talking point. But Brazil's not paying it. The U.S. is paying it. People in the U.S. companies, U.S. consumers are paying every time he raises the tariffs.
So how does that affect, like, the trade industry right now? Like, if that were to come into effect, what will trade industries have to do, or where are they standing? Like, what are they going to have to do?
I mean, figure out how they're going to absorb some of this cost. I think you're going to see a lot of manufacturing move to different countries. We've already been seeing that with the extra 25% Section 301 duties put on Chinese goods, where a lot of people were nearshoring. So basically what that means is that, Chinese companies were opening factories, manufacturing facilities in Mexico, where a USMCA free trade agreement was in place. So instead of manufacturing in China, where they have all of these extra duties in place when they import into the US, they were just manufacturing in Mexico and bringing things in duty free. So I think you're going to see a lot of people making strategic business decisions where they're placing their manufacturing facilities, almost strictly because of tariffs. Um,
Well, that's another question. So I'm just gonna, for example, in Germany, I know Germany is treating the United States a little unfairly, let's say, when it comes to the auto market,
mhm.
because we put a lot of tariffs, and the reciprocal tariffs. I don't know if it would make sense, but I see where Trump is coming from because of of the differences. But so let's say he puts them in place. Do you think that countries like Germany or whoever could go around it and say, okay, we'll send our goods to Mexico and then they'll come from Mexico to the United States? Is that like a possibility?
No, you can't. You can't do that. You would have to. So the country of origin of your goods is,
Origin.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's determined by substantial transformation, right?
I see.
So yeah,
Yes.
you would have to move your manufacturing to Mexico, or at least enough of your manufacturing to where it's considered to be of Mexican origin now, as opposed to German origin.
But like sometimes, well, I don't know, but I feel like that might be cheaper even for Germany because things are expensive in Germany. And like to
Yeah,
have a business, you pay a lot of taxes in Germany and
yeah.
stuff. And to
Mhm.
move it to Mexico, I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. Seems honestly like a good option, but
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
don't know.
But a lot of companies have been doing it, so it must be a good option, right? For
Do you
some
recommend it? Do you
companies.
recommend that? Or,
I mean, I think it depends on everyone's business, right?
mm-hmm.
And also, like, where are your raw materials coming from? If you're a German company and all of your raw materials are coming from Germany, it may
Yeah,
be more
probably not.
expensive to move to Mexico because
Yeah.
then you've got to ship all your raw materials over to Mexico.
Yeah.
So I think it really just depends on the company and its supply chain, as a whole. So
And then, okay, so you did address, and so let's just say that Bonnie sent me a little outline of, all the things she has. And you can also look at her LinkedIn because she discusses a lot of those things on her LinkedIn. Um, very, just in a discussing manner. And one of the things you mentioned is the IRS abolishment. Do you say that? Abolish the IRS to and replace income taxes with tariff revenue. That's wild. I don't even know how that came out of my mouth. But can you go into that real quick to just
I
give
can.
me a little implications and what is there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting proposal that I don't know any former presidents have made before. The US collects $3 trillion a year in taxes from its citizens, right? People who
Hmm.
pay taxes. Um, Roughly the same amount is imported each year. About $3 trillion worth of goods are imported into
Oh,
the US. So if you want to collect $3 trillion from imports, your duty rate would have to be 100%, right? Because you're importing $3 trillion worth of goods, you'd have to charge 100% duty on
oh my
everything to
God.
get
Okay,
3 trillion. You see what I'm
that's
saying?
impossible. That's
Yeah. And
impossible.
so if you do that, let's say in a whatever this world that now exists, you're charging 100% duty on everything that's imported. If that 100% duty gets passed along in the form of higher prices to consumer, the higher the price, if you think back to like your economics class that or civics that you might have taken like in high school,
Yeah.
um, supply and demand, right? So as cost of items increases, demand is going to decrease, right?
Decrease.
If all
Hmm.
of a sudden this really pretty cute dress I want to buy that's $30, that I'm like, oh yeah, $30 for a dress is super reasonable. But tomorrow it's $300. I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to buy that dress. It's $300. Like, I don't need that dress after all, right? So supply and demand is going to change. So not only if you raise prices to like 100% because duty has increased by 100%, you're still not going to get the $3 trillion. It's not going to work out. The math doesn't work out. So you'd almost
Yeah.
have to quadruple prices in order to get the same amount of money in revenue that you are getting from taxes. So there have been several economists who are way, way, way smarter than I am about this sort of thing, who have said that the math just doesn't work on this plan. Like I see what you're trying to do, President Trump, but the math doesn't work. Now, there may be some sort of world where the math works to, still collect some taxes, some income tax, and also raise tariffs so that you're raising, you're lowering the amount of taxes, but you're raising the amount of tariffs. There may be some
Yeah.
middle ground there that works, but completely abolishing the IRS and trying to, raise that money using tariffs instead, the math doesn't work on that. Also, the creation of an external revenue service to collect these is a little silly, frankly, because CBP already does that, and they've been doing it for over 100 years.
I can tell you one thing about that, because I did talk to, damn it, who was it? Ooh, I can't tell you right now who was, but she did have a good analysis. So she was questioning it too, of course. Everyone is very confused on that. But she's saying that CBP focuses a lot on immigration, which kind of which is like in the main focus right now, immigration, which kind of brings down the focus on, trade and things coming into the country. And like, maybe it's slower because, we don't have that much CBP officers focusing on trade rather than immigration. And to basically have another agency that focuses solely on trade rather than CBP, who focuses solely on immigration. I don't know. It was along that side.
Yeah. But for me, like, the same people aren't doing the same thing today. Do you know what I mean? So like the people focused on imported goods versus people coming into the US are two different people. You don't generally have like a CBP officer who's looking at both. So you basically have almost like two divisions of CBP today. So like in your argument, or in whoever you spoke to argument, if you want to take the half of CBP that's focused on trade today and rename them the External Revenue Service, fine. But there's just no need to create another agency where the goal, it already exists. The task.
Also, probably more money. Like, that probably takes money. Like, where's this money coming from?
Right. And I thought there was a whole Department of Government Efficiency. This doesn't sound very efficient to me. If you already have a department doing this job, why create another one? Like, I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. No,
it sounds like it comes from a place of ignorance. And I don't mean stupidity. I mean, truly just like not knowing that CBP is already doing this job, So I think a little more research, might change somebody's mind.
So I just want to lastly ask you, so looking ahead, what are you expecting? What can you recommend for people? Definitely getting consulting at this moment in time, I think would be ideal.
But I mean, just looking ahead at specific things, March 4th, right now, we think that on March 4th, the tariffs on Canada and Mexico are going to go into play. Obviously, a lot could change between now and then, but that's the date right now. On March 12th, the aluminum tariffs are going to increase from 10% to 25%. So definitely keep an eye on that. Yeah, definitely keep an eye on that. And then President Trump said day before yesterday, February 19th, that he's thinking about a 25% tariff on lumber and lumber related products, semiconductors, automobiles, and pharmaceuticals that would take place as early as April 2nd. So those are some immediate things to keep an eye out for, just some key dates to kind of keep in mind if you're in any of those industries. But as far as what should companies be doing, I mean, again, I would know your supply chain. See if you can move if you're importing raw materials or components from China, Canada, Mexico, any of these affected countries, I would think about, looking into if you can source those elsewhere. Can you get them from a different country that's not as affected by these tariffs? That's the first thing to take a look at. Secondly, if you can't, let's say you're locked into a long-term agreement, or, there just is nobody outside of China, for example, who makes this particular thing that you need, then look into duty mitigation strategies. Take a look at, is your valuation formula correct? Because ultimately you're paying the percentage of duty on that base value. So you want to make sure that's correct. Are your classifications correct? Could you possibly be paying too much in duty because you've classified your goods wrong? Then look at those duty mitigation strategies I mentioned earlier. Are there more free trade agreements you could be taking advantage of that you're not today? Could you do duty drawback on some of these things? Or what about maybe a bonded warehouse, a free trade zone? Like, there's lots of different duty mitigation strategies that folks can take a look at. And I'd be happy to talk anybody through, kind of what their supply chain is and what their business looks like, so that we can maybe see if any of those make sense, for your business. But now's the time. Now's the time to look into those and see, what you might be able to do to mitigate some of this.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing that you mentioned, I mean, those were great points. I'm so happy that you're able to talk on that and give these kind of instructions, not
Yeah.
instructions, but
Guidance.
somewhat
Yeah. Yeah.
guidance to these people that are currently facing these uncertainties and struggles. You mentioned like pharmaceuticals. That is crazy when you said that. I'm like, aren't, what is it called? Medications like already way expensive here.
No, they
I feel
are.
they are. I
Yeah.
mean, in Germany, it's already. I mean, everything is kind of cheaper, and I can't really um like
Hmm.
compare that. But wow, I mean, when you go buy ibuprofen here or something, it's like insane.
I
I'm
know.
like,
I mean,
what?
on it, like some people, I know me personally, like I went to fill one of my prescriptions last month that I've been on for a long time, right? And all of a sudden they wanted $1,400 a month for it. And I
What?
just had to make the decision like, well, I guess I'm just not going to take that anymore, right? And
Yeah.
nobody should have to make those decisions. And so, I mean, raising duty on pharmaceuticals is it's sad, because I think more and more people will have to make those decisions. Like, do I pay my rent or pay my mortgage or take my medicine? And luckily for me, it wasn't a medication that was like keeping me alive, but for some
Yeah.
people it's their cancer treatment, it's their diabetes medicine. It is
Yeah.
more pertinent that they get those things. So
Which then it trickles to another whole problem, which I'm not going to address, but it's healthcare. And there you
yeah.
go. I'm like, it just goes on, and I have not seen that in the news. So all I see is trade, trade, trade. I'm like, isn't there something else we could talk about? Um, um, but I want to thank you so much for coming on. I mean, it's always great to have experts, especially now that you have your own firm, like your consulting firm. And I mean, I hope that some people, that need the guidance and need the help, that they reach out to you, because I mean, it helps everyone. I feel like at this
Yeah.
moment, and we want no business to suffer under, some of the regulations that are being made or whatever. We want everyone to thrive here. Can't say
Absolutely.
that word, but yeah, that really concludes our episode for today. I was so excited to have you, and I'll see you on ICPA. We will also have loads of
Yes.
ICPA content, hopefully. And yeah, so we'll see you again next week with pretty much, I don't know. I really can't tell you because it changes every day, but very exciting. So have a great week and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ame.
Bonnie.
Bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.